Well, thank you folks for inviting me. Aviation has been one of my passions forever and ever and ever and ever, so I won't go back to how long that's been, but it's from less than 10 years old up to now. Anyway, I understand I'm supposed to do this for about 30 minutes. My game plan is to give you sort of a history, an overrun of this airport. Then in the last 15 to 20 minutes, I'll open up for questions from the floor and try to do it that way. This airport was opened in 1946 by, and it was known, the county bought it from a state of a guy named Porter. It was called the Porter Farm. And all this land here, plus with all the land across the Route 20 and down the other roads. Right now, going back to the landfill, that's called Porter Road. And the first two operators were whom I knew because later they retired, and they used to come in. I worked at the drugstore here by the railroad by the name of Grimes, and they used to come in there on Sunday mornings and drink coffee and read the paper. And it was a guy by the name of George Tyler, who owned Linden Farm, and another guy by the name of Warren Holiday from Rapidan. And they operated this airport for a long time and did very, very well. And over the years, when I first took my first airplane ride out of this airport in January 1955, there was nothing here except a small office building on the other side, along with one of those military-type Quonset huts with one airplane in it. And it developed after that. And the runway at that time was something like 2,200 feet and I think 50 foot wide. It's now 30. Later years we got federal funding, and it's now 3,200 feet and 75 foot wide. So it'll accommodate most it'll accommodate all singles and most twins, and some jets can come in here and go out if the guy knows his airplane well. I use the example sometimes. The guy who landed the airline in the Hudson, without anybody being injured or seriously, and no fatalities. Here's a guy who knew his airplane and knew what he could do with it, and that's about what size of it is. Now, over the years, we've had a lot of different changes on this. People coming and going. We had a man and his wife moved down here from Alaska in the 1970s, and they opened up a restaurant over in the old terminal, and they did very, very well. And they tried to get funded to expand it, and that didn't work out so well, so they ended up having to move out and get a job somewhere else. So anyway, now, unfortunately, the building on the other side, that white building, that was built by this used stuff by the Chamber of Commerce, include people like Ed Harwell, Wallace and John Walters, and H.B. Sedgwick, somebody like that. But the building still is a real solid building. It's still very well, it's very well, it's very sound, I'll put it that way. So the hangars over on the other side, we used to have we had a guy here by the name of Pete Austin, who was president of the National Bank of Orange, and Pete was a retired colonel from the Air Force, and he flew military-type airplanes, and he owned interest in the airplanes here. He wanted to build hangars, and so there was no funding available, so there were 50 people, including myself, who signed a limited liability promissory note at his bank for $300,000 to build those hangars, and we let the rent amortize the loan. And that's how we got those hangars. And so anyway, they're still existing, and they're still they're very solid, good hangars. So, do we have any questions? Somebody have a question? I'd like to, give you a whole bunch of stuff, but I don't know what you want to know.
Hey, Hubert, are there any of those old buildings from 1955 or 1950s? Any of those buildings still here?
No, none of the. See the T hangar now. The main hangar over there, the big white building, that was built in the early '60s. Late, and then the T hangars were built. I occupied one of them, number 2 hangar, from 1969 until recently, and so they were built in the late '60s, and so now I could tell you about this. Something you might be interested in knowing about the federal. The funding for this for an airport and new construction is done by the FAA, the State Division of Aeronautics, and local. Federal, usually, if you had to do a runway or taxiway or so, maybe some buildings, new construction like this building here, it's 95% by the feds and 2.5% from the state and 2.5% from local. Now that's what it was back years ago. I'm not sure what it is right now, but that's when I was on the airport commission, that's what it was at the time. So it may have changed a little bit one way or the other, because as you know, the government changes stuff all the time. So, okay, another question? No, the Gordonsville Airport is, at one time now, was one of the oldest airports in the country. So it was there before this airport was built. I don't know when it was built exactly, but it was here. It was there a long time before this airport was built. Yeah. So it and an airport in Maryland by the name of College Park were the 2 oldest airports in the country. College Park Airport is still in operation. So is Gordonsville. Matter of fact, they're redoing it at Gordonsville Airport right now with the all new runway and everything over there. They have funding to do that. Okay, Luther.
Are they going to keep the beacon in Gordonsville?
The beacon is on the. You talking about the rotating beacon at nighttime? It's here. It operates. It comes on at sundown and goes off at sun up.
Parachute jumpers, skydivers coming here. When did the skydivers start?
Skydivers started. They've been here for probably 25 years. And they are a very heavy supporter, and of the airport, and they do a lot of funding. Here, like that hangar over there. That's an $800,000 hangar that they pay for. The only thing that the county had to do is give them a lease on the land for that thing for, I think, something like 20 years or 25 years. Once it's over, once that 25 years is over, it becomes county property. Well, it is county property now. So anyway, so.
Did you actually test the parachute here? No.
What?
No.
You want to test the parachutes from Silkville here?
No. They have their own certified people who pack the parachutes. They have to meet certain qualifications, and they have to be tested so often. I don't know that I don't think they've ever had a failure on their parachutes, and they're now. It may, if it is, I don't know about it. I'll put it that way.
Road, and he landed on the top of the building on the other side of the road, landed on the roof. And what happened was, when his feet hit the roof, then the air went out of the chute, and he fell off the roof and was killed. And then one guy, Roman Campbell, over here, he didn't even open his reserve chute. They think he had some help. Something happened when his first chute failed, and he didn't even try to open the second chute.
Well,
But as far as when I started practicing law, which was 81, one of the early things I did was help the guy who owned that hangar, the old hangar. I think his name was Erickson.
yes, that's correct.
I helped Erickson sell that hangar to Skydive Orange. They were getting started.
Erickson was a dealer in with Cessna aircraft from Oklahoma City, and he bought the land from the county for that big hangar over there, built that to service airplanes he took in on trade. You know, if he got an airplane in and sold them a new airplane, and he needed a paint job or engine job or some, you know, something on it, he would do it in that hangar. Well, later on, Erickson got cancer and was not able to do that, and he ended up dying, and his widow, whom I knew very, very well, dropped it back to the county. I don't know what they paid for it, but anyway, they bought the hangar, so that hangar is now back as part of the county property. Okay, Sharon?
Hubert, how old were you when you started flying?
10 years old.
Well, my wife says that I started doing it when I was a teenager. I don't know, I was probably 15, 16 years old, something like that. I don't recall.
Here in Orange? Did you
Yeah. My first airplane ride was off this airport in January 1955. Now that's an interesting story I can tell you about. Roy, back then, I don't know how it is now, but back then, the guys in the class had to take one semester of shop. You know, he had to go to do shop. The girls would have to take one semester of home ec. When I got into the shop class, I don't know how I knew it, but I got to know this guy by the name of Roy Sherlin, Sherlin. He was from Alta Vista, Virginia. I didn't realize it, but he had an airplane parked here, and he's the one who took me for my first airplane ride. And after school, after military and all that, he and I became friends, and I used to visit him at his home in Alta Vista. And so anyway, he died about 5, maybe 10 years ago. But Roy Sherlin was a very decent guy. So, you know, so.
Hubert, I remember back when I was working at the radio station, there was a lot of acrimony between this airport and the Gordonsville airport because they were competing for the same funds with the FAA.
Yeah, it still goes on. There is still a, matter of fact, I don't know what the grant was, but they just got a big grant for the Gordonsville Airport to redo that whole runway area there. It was closed it's still closed for about 6 months, and it'll be open again I think sometime in the latter part of November it's going to open up back again. So anyway, but there is this debate between the two airports about funding. That's correct. And I don't know how they work it out, but that's above my pay grade. So anyway, okay, yeah.
It gives the airport a tax break or something because the airport creates so much revenue and brings it into the county. Isn't that kind of a deal of some kind?
We used to get credit, no, I'll put it this way to you. At one time, we were paying a personal property tax on the airplanes, but about a year ago, they removed that. Now, I think it was participated by the other airports doing the same thing, and we had guys that leave here to move to Culpeper or Louis or somewhere like that, and that's why they have. Now, why they did it, I don't know, but right now, the only tax we have right now is on the fuel, and it's pretty heavy on the fuel. Aviation fuel right now is around $7 a gallon here. Yeah, so okay.
Hubert, were you here on 9/11?
I was here at 9/11. We couldn't do,
Got to talk us through that experience and also the changes that happened to this at every airport in the country after 9/11.
yeah, matter of fact, we could not, we couldn't come or go on this airport for about, I think for about 2 weeks, you know, something like that. And, no, that's true. And even today, there is a specific control area that comes right from Dulles Airport right down, right at the edge of Orange Airport. Right? If you want to go to Manassas or Warrenton, or so, you have to call up the FAA and get a code and be able to put in your device in the airplane that shows up on this thing. So it's you know, it's in other words, 911 tightened up the rules on aviation quite a bit. You know, there's a lot of things that we could not do, or could do, but could not do now. So you have to do it. You can get it done, but you have to go through a mechanism to get it done. You have to, if you're going to go outside the airport and go into Washington, you know, Dulles or something like that, you have to call the FAA and get what we call a transponder code, which is what that transponder does. You put the code in, and it notifies the FAA that you are. It sends out a signal with that code in it. Okay.
It looks like the 101st Airport Division is broken up in
Arrangement to take it somewhere.
The airport is a public airport. Yeah. It's public. You can come and go just like me or anybody else. I mean, there is no restrictions on it. So, you know, at this airport now, if you go to Charlottesville or some of these other airports where they have what's called tower controlled airport, it's a little more restrictive there. See, now on this airport, we don't have a control. We do have a frequency that you can monitor. And everybody is supposed to honor certain things, saying where you are, what you're doing, all this kind of stuff. In other words, if I'm coming in from the south, about 10 miles out, I'll say I'm 10 miles out at a certain altitude, entering runway 26 or something like that. And that way, everybody else who's monitoring that frequency will hear that. Now, if you go to Charlottesville or Richmond, you have to call. See, this is called a non-towered airport. Up there is a tower, you know, which means it's under control of the FAA. You have to call in on an approach frequency and tell them where you are. Then they'll give you a transponder code and tell you what to do from that point on. And you're in their control. They'll tell you when to turn and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, in Richmond is the same way.
And the whole neighborhood, they had about 200 and some people there to buy bonds. He's going to put on a big demonstration there. He got the old guys from World War I there to go up in the attic and get their outfits on. They had to rearrange a few buttons, I'm sure. But they all got out there, and he set off the smoke, and he put tear gas in it, and everybody donned their gas masks and fixed their bayonets, and they're going to go charging through it to show how they charged through gas and smoke in World War I. Well, as soon as they put the tear gas in it, the wind shifted. And that was at 7 years old. That was my first dose of tear gas. I remember my mother saying, don't rub your eyes. You're going to tell a 7-year-old or yourself you're not going to rub your eyes with tear gas in it? You're a non-believer. But in any case, that did happen in 1945.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Hubert, do you still use that radio beacon outside of Boswell?
Radio beacon. Now, they do have what we call a rotating beacon, which is that it gives a red and white light at nighttime, or might even be a green light. But anyway, that's that. Now, there's another thing called a beacon that's a navigational aid. Now, the down below Gordonsville there is a very, very popular navigational aid on the East Coast called Gordonsville VOR, very high observed frequency range, and it's a navigational aid that when it sends out a signal, and your guys in the airplane has a device that will interrupt that or intercept that rather. And give you give you the radio you're on, how far out, and all that kind of stuff. You know, it gives you a lot of dimensions about where it's very good. Now, unfortunately, that came along way back. Right now, satellite navigation is becoming more predominant off of. You're called GPS. Okay.
I have a story involving that Beacon Law, and the pilot was telling the people on the plane where they were, and he said, and we're going through, I think he said Greensboro, and then we'll go over Gordonsville, and then we'll go to Charlottesville. So Arch flagged down one of the stewardesses, and he said, I'm from the county where Gordonsville is located. Could the pilot fly in such a way that I can look out of the window and see Gordonsville? And she said, I'll check. A few minutes later, she comes back down the aisle, and she said the pilot said he'd be delighted to fly in a way that so you could look out the window and see Gordonsville, but he has a question. What state is Gordonsville in?
I have to tell you, there are people who they probably get disoriented or they lose it or whatever. But you have to be on your toes involved in aviation. I can tell you that emphatically. I have my ratings are. I'm a professional pilot rated, but I've never had the desire to fly the airlines. I've always wanted to do what I'm doing or what I've done. So go from point A to point B as fast as I can get there, and as cheap as I can get there. Okay, Sharon?
What year did we move over here in our new terminal?
In this terminal. When was this terminal built? Oh, it's built about 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I can remember before we got this new terminal, and I can remember being in the old terminal, and we'd have to have our meeting. We'd have to have our meetings over there. We'd have to share with the jumpers too, because they would be coming through. But man, what a beautiful day it was when we came over here. And I just wish more of the public realized that this is for public use. And how you can just come in here and sit and watch the planes land. And it's just, a lot of people in Orange County don't realize how fortunate we are to have this.
We are very fortunate about this was done by a grant. The county, I don't recall what the county amount was, but it's very small. A couple $100,000, something like that. So.
And at the time, Culpeper Airport was hoping to get their new airport before we got ours. But I don't think they ever did. But how in the world?
They haven't done it yet.
Yeah, how in the world we slid in there to get this beautiful building? We're so fortunate.
You notice these airplanes in the ceiling here. I donated those to the airport at the time we had the celebration about 10, 12 years ago. I had an acquaintance in Florida that I knew very, very well, and I found out he had a heart attack and died. So I found out who was handling his personal property to sell, and I knew he had these airplanes. So there was a lady who was handling that, and I called her up, and I said, I told her who I was and what I was interested in. And I think there were 17 or 18 of those airplanes, and I said, I want to bid on those with a bid, And she said, well, let me think about that, and I'll call you back a day or so. And so she did. She said, I found the airplanes, I found the boxes they came in, and I've added that value up for that, and that's going to be the lowest, that's going to be the bid. I said, I don't need to know what the bid is, but I'll make that bid. You go ahead and put my name down for that, whatever that figure is. Well, that was, I think that was on a Wednesday. The auction was going to be on Saturday, the following Saturday. The following, I think Monday or Tuesday, she called me and says, what can I do with 17 airplanes? Nobody bid on them. So my wife and I got the truck with some pillows and blankets and went to Florida. And we picked them up, and I took a check down there for her, and then we brought them here and installed them a few days before the airport had the dedication here for this new terminal, and they're there, and they're now part of the county airport, and I was glad. They're mostly World War II model airplanes. There's only one that's right here that's called a A-10, or it's also known as a Warthog. It's the twin engine right here, and it's being used by the Air Force right now. It's a very, very nice airplane. So.
Thank you for doing that.
Okay.
It adds a lot to the airport. Thank
Well, I think it adds to the airport a lot. You know. Okay, Ray, what you got?
Hubert, over the history of the airport, has there ever been any catastrophic accidents?
Yeah. Well, well.
And I'm not talking about skydiving, I'm talking about aircraft accidents.
I can tell you, there have been in my. Let me go back. A real good friend of mine was here one Sunday morning with a friend of his, and we had coffee over there, and he, I don't know what happened, but he took off going this way, and he had his brother-in-law with him. I'll give you my theory, but anyway, right at the end of this runway, he spun in and killed both of them. Well, I think his brother-in-law probably, I don't know this, was repositioned himself in the seat so he could see something else, and he got his foot on the rudder, because the airplanes are dual control. So I don't know that to be a fact, but that's my theory. Because the guy was not experienced in aviation. So if he wanted to change, he probably happened to push it, and of course when it hit that rudder, it's going to do that. It's going to do it. And there was another guy had an oil change here one time, and I don't know what happened on that, but he took off, and he didn't put the dipstick in. Of course, the airplane develops a lot of pressure inside the case, and he across Route 20 out there, he spun in because he got oil all over the windshield. And he got excited about that, and that's it. And now there's a student about 5 years ago took off here, and it's my theory. He was one of those guys who liked to play on. He had a couple of iPads and cell phones. I don't know this to be a fact, but he was taking off going that way. He spun in, and I found in the floor of the airplane there's 2 iPads and a cell phone. It's my opinionated opinion that he dropped one of those things, and he reached down to move it, pick it up, and he lost control of the airplane. That's my theory. Because people sometimes will do that. They drop something, they automatically. But in an airplane, first thing you got to do is control. You got to stay in control, just like in a car. You got to keep yourself under control of that thing. They're the only 3 accidents I can think of right now.
I remember one more where the skydivers took off and they never got airworthy, and they just went off the end of the airport of the runway, and it started a fire on board the aircraft. And the reason I know that is because I was taking flying lessons at the time. and I saw this burned out hulk of an aircraft. I would fly over it every time I took off. And I finally said, you know, I don't think I want to do this.
Well, Ray asked me not to say anything about skydiving other than that. So anyway, I can relate to that. What happened, it shouldn't have happened, but all airplanes have, at least it should have, a lock-in mechanism. So when in a wind situation, when the wind, they don't flap, all the rudders and the ailerons and all the flaps, they don't sit there and do this kind of stuff. It locks them in place. This guy took off without removing that control lock. It was a thing goes right down in the when you pull the yoke back, you drop it in there, and he took off without that. Now, why he didn't do it, didn't take it out, it's just, I don't know. But anyway, there were no fatalities in that particular situation. But a guy who owns a nursery over in the valley, who used to do a lot of skydiving, he did injure himself in that, and he's paralyzed from the waist down. He's still around. So but that was, there's no fatalities in that case. But it did destroy the airplane, though. So, and I don't remember how many guys. It was twin. I don't remember how many people on board, but it's probably 12 or 14, something like that. So.
Now, Hubert, back several years ago, they cut the tops out of a bunch of trees down here off the east end of the airport.
Yeah.
Was that related to airport operations?
It was, and the FAA does this all the time. They have contractors go out and do what we call slope indicators. And what that means is this. We've got instrument approaches in this airport. I can come in here in the foggy weather and I go down to 500 feet, and if you don't have the airport in sight, then you're supposed to pick up gear and pour on the power and go around and come back and try it again. Later, maybe fog and stuff move out. Well, anyway, what happens when they do the slope indicators, they put a thing out here, looks like a transit, and they shoot it up get the angle between the runway and that, and if the treetops are in there, they got to cut them out, and that's what that's all about. And that's why we've been fooling around with that thing for probably 25, 30 years. They finally have eliminated the trees, period. So right now, there's not going to be a problem in the future with those trees. Largest airplane. Are you familiar with a DC-3 or C-47? They have been in here, and we've had several jets that come in here. There's a Cessna. There's a jet by the name of Cessna. It's a nice jet, but if the guy knows his airplane, it doesn't meet the engineer's degree of being able to land here, but if he knows his airplane, he can do it. And he just has to be real careful, And there is a guy that does it. They come in here quite often. So, yes, sir.
Back in the 60s, when I was in the military, we flew up here from NAS Norfolk in a S-2E Tracker, which is a 2-engine Grumman plane, anti-submarine warfare plane, and we did a couple touch and goes on the airstrip over here, and we flew over my dad's farm down in Roseville and scared the hell out of his cow and my horse. But my dad talked about that till he died. He was thrilled in that we flew over the farm.
Well, there are people out there who do stuff that's not quite kosher. Like, there have been some people who've gotten some real serious trouble by flying too low over places, and they get, like Lakeland Woods, about just the last 2 or 3 months, a guy from Culpeper went down the lake, and they got his number. Guess what? He lost his privilege to fly forever. Yeah, okay.
How many planes coming in out of here every day, Hubert?
It depends on the day. They keep record of that, but I don't know. It depends how nice the weather is. Sometimes you may have a couple hundred, sometimes you may only have two, so it depends on weather conditions.
When did you get your pilot's license?
I'm sorry?
When did you get your pilot's license? We fly so late.
I got it in Gordonsville,
19 what?
Huh?
You got your pilot license when? 19 what?
It was in the early 60s, but I'm not sure when that is. He wanted to know when I got when I was able to fly the airplane, passed all the tests and everything. It was in the early 60s, but I don't remember because you had to be of a certain age, and I had to wait till I got to that age in order to do it.
All right. Thank you. One thing you don't know who I am, I'm Hubert's youngest brother, Dallas, and I have a short story for you.
Oh my.
This goes back in the early 60s.
Hold it up there.
Early 60s or so. And that's when I grew up in Somerset at High Point Farm on Gaston Hall. I would like to refer to Gaston Hall. I think it's more history to it. Anyway, I don't think myself or my parents knew that Hubert was flying at the time. One day he was out in the yard and we saw this plane start circling around. I said, he's going down. And he went down and flew into a cow pasture. I said, what idiot is flying into a cow pasture? Come to find out it was Hubert and Lou, I believe. I'm strolling up to the yard. I couldn't believe what I saw. Anyway, that wasn't the problem. The problem was when he took off. When he took off, he was heading towards the Blue Ridge. And there was a train track, phone lines, and power lines going down the track. He's not going to make it. But sure enough, whoo, there he went. And he made it up there. But this guy loves to fly, I'll tell you that.
Thank you for that bad story. All right.
How many trips have you made down here to show students on a field trip or seniors on a field trip your airplane, the airplanes at the airport? How many of those trips have you made?
I have no clue. I don't know. Thousands probably, yeah. Well, early on, I was very active in we used to have a thing by the AOPA, which is the Airplane Owners and Pilots Association, called, what's the name of that thing now? Anyway, Young Flyers. I've flown on hundreds of them, for the first flight. We used to do a lot of that stuff. So, but that's in the past. So, no, at the club over, yes, that's correct. Up until recently now, I don't know who's doing it now, but I sort of gave that up. Yeah, there's about 7. I think I've got four or five of them. I've still maintained flags. One for here and one out to Baptist Church property on 15. I do that one. And I got one at home, so anyway, I'm very conscious of the American flag and what it represents. So anyway.
Hubert, I have a question back over here. Back when I was teaching school, I had a student from Culpeper who made money waxing airplanes. This was, of course, in the last century. Do airplanes today need to be waxed?
Oh yeah, they should be washed because you get rid of the dust and dirt and stuff on there and bugs. it's called parasitic drag when you have your dust will stick to your paint. You need to be cleaned and polished, you know, to make it smooth, so the wind flow is real good, airflow real good. Okay, folks, I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope I've answered everybody's questions.
I think that wraps us up. Thank y'all for coming out. Feel free to, since this is a public airport, feel free to stick around, watch the airplanes take off and land, and some of these skydivers. Again, I want to thank Hubert for coming out and giving us this real educational and interesting presentation.